Good morning. Dear Cousin David, when I expressed amazement at the number of issues that you get involved in, Nadine said that the issues were all related and that they involved you. We were looking at the publisher's brochure that you sent us, and we both decided that we would like to read Ecumenical Death and Energizing of Power Politics. I always wanted to write a novel, but it would take me years to shake the everyday language of my profession. Nadine told a group of her friends who came to the house for lunch one day that I could not direct someone to the men's room without an explanation first of mechatronics, technotronics, and cybernetic management. She was, of course, reading some of my notes for a graduate studies course that I was teaching. Her friends laughed and enjoyed her humor. I didn't laugh. David, did you ever hear a group of doctors at lunch? I did promise Nadine that if I were to tell you about the trouble that I got into with the party in the 70s, I would try to keep the letter conversational and not lapse into one of my dissertations. When a student begins his studies here in economics, the first thing that he must get a grip on is the basics. Marxist historical materialism. Simply stated, it means that ideas and products derived from those ideas should come from human need. Marxist thinking began in a historical context. That is true in the creative field as well as in the sciences. A Soviet inventor thinks of the problems of the past and tries to create a product that will alleviate that problem. He or she should not think of frivolous products to be produced as status symbols or symbols of profit. The state cannot waste money on such projects, and the inventor knows that. Such a project will not receive a very high priority for production. Even in the field of children's toys, which is a large industry here, that kind of thinking prevails. As an economist, called upon from time to time to present new ideas for improving the Soviet economy, I must incorporate the history of my people into the mix of social environment, in order to project the economic possibilities for the future. If many farm workers came into the cities from the rural areas and take jobs in manufacturing, as happened after the war, an economist has to take into consideration how long it will take to train them. Not simply to train them to run the machines, but to develop the kind of work habits and discipline necessary to meet quotas. It would be foolish to expect from them what they cannot do. It would be just as foolish to expect a tire plant to produce more tires than the machinery can produce itself. When you set goals for a 5-year plan, you must reach all of these aspects of production. Now, to get to my point, the capitalist criticizes the Marxist for not creating enough incentive for the worker, and the results are slow and shoddy production. The Marxist criticizes the capitalist for creating false incentives. If he works hard to make more money, that is supposed to enable him to buy more goods. However, as he works harder and earns more, he begins to buy more, creating inflation, which puts him back to square one. As you pointed out in your letter, the cost of basics, like the new home, are often put further out of his reach as his work improves and he works harder. He too may wind up chasing the mechanical rabbit. Admittedly, oversimplified, these two valid criticisms have had academicians in both societies working on the problem for years. The results have been a gradual merging of some of the concepts. We are pushing our workers closer to yours and your workers, and their unions are moving closer to ours. In your earlier letter, you illustrated how many ideas that have been adopted and are taken for granted by American workers today that were considered socialistic just a few decades ago. The entire economic world began to change in the 70s. In my first book, I said that neither Marx nor Engels had a color television set that received satellite pictures from the other side of the earth. Not in his wildest dreams could Marx imagine a man orbiting the entire earth in just 90 minutes. Nadine has reprimanded me for quoting Lenin to my American cousin, but it is, I believe, appropriate at this time. It is a quotation that I often repeat to my students. Lenin said, "In no sense do we regard the Marxist theory as something complete and unassailable." On the contrary, we are convinced that this theory is only the cornerstone of the science which socialism must advance in all directions if they do not wish to fall behind in life. We feel that Marx did not give a religion based on historical fables, but a living idea to be adapted and to grow with the times, and for us to grow with it. The idea of a truly free market was buried once and for all in the 70s, if it ever existed at all here. You have had for many years antitrust laws, farm subsidies, oil subsidies, and huge holding companies that control certain aspects of the marketplace. You have huge supermarket food chains that control the prices. Your government buys products to control prices. The original idea of a totally free market can no longer remain a practical direction for you. Khrushchev enraged Americans with his statement, "We'll bury you." It was taken out of context. I know that what he was thinking at the time was that the international competition will soon put you at a disadvantage on the world market, unless you resort to force in creating favorable market conditions, which you have done in the past. Nikita felt that if the embargoes imposed on us were lifted, we could surpass you in gross national product and international trade. We, on the other hand, clung to the idea of strict central planning much too long. Command management was a necessity before and right after the war, but like two young lovers trying to say goodnight, we held on to the idea until we were forced to readjust. In my book, I pointed this out. I also stated that we should be paying more attention to market demands created by the market itself and human needs. Lenin's bird, I said, is too big and healthy to force feed. It can fly very well by itself, and it can also feed itself. Our people lived through terrible years of war, thinking only of survival. But we must remember that for most of the poor peasants, life was just a matter of survival for many generations before the war. A worker thought of clothes only as something to keep him warm. Today, the need is fashion. Pride and dignity are motivating factors that an economist must meld into his thoughts. Pride need not mean the false kind used to elevate one worker over another by the cost or fashion of what he wears. No, David, I speak of one's own creativity in appearance. Again, I will oversimplify. I suggested a radical change that would allow the worker to earn more and to keep more. In America, during the war, you had victory gardens to help the economy that was concentrating on war production. I suggested the same thing here, and allowing the producer to keep the profits. In the 70s, there were many already beginning to do the very same thing illegally. I also suggested that we give top priority to the building of more co-ops and private housing for people to buy. The idea was that market demand was for juicier carrots, and they must be supplied in a hurry. Without all the mathematical calculations for planning balanced growth, and without the computer charts, I wanted to spell out flesh and blood issues. It was no longer important to point with pride and say, see how many pairs of women's shoes we made this year? If women didn't like the style of shoe. Today, the market must tell us what it wants. That way we can achieve what every economist dreams about. That is producing the maximum with the least cost and the minimum waste. If you produce what the market wants, you cannot fail. Now I know there are two schools of thought about that. Your advertising people will say that the market must be told what it wants first. Fashion must be created by experts, they will say. That is the way it has always been. Women do not demand fashion. Fashion commands them to buy. Capitalist economists have always accepted that concept in their planning. They will tell you that enough promotion and advertising will sell anything. The pixie with her glasses on just said that if one doubts that, all one has to do is look at the music young people are buying today. That makes my point about waste. Forcing the market creates enormous amounts of waste, and that is what I want to avoid. David, I do not have a copy of the book in English, but I doubt that you would want to read it anyway. I was so happy when I finally finished it. I am sure you know the feeling. I was especially overjoyed because I had been invited to give a series of lectures at Columbia University in New York, and with the book finished, I was ready to go. The book was in the hands of the publisher, and I was preparing for my trip. But if you recall, David, I mentioned how shocked I was, as a young man, to receive the party's reaction to a piece that I wrote for Komso Pravda. That was a small firecracker. The book was a nuclear explosion. I was criticized for anti-Marxist thought and propaganda. I was suspended from the party, and the book was not published. The worst thing that happened was that my trip that I was so looking forward to was canceled. I have mentioned my tears often in these exchanges, and I hope that you do not get the impression that I weep all the time. But I must admit that when I heard that they were canceling my trip because of a rumor that I had planned to defect, I wept. As in every country, there are the hardheads who have to think about how they are going to put their pants on in the morning and give a great deal of concentration to their socks. Somehow it seems many of these people find their way into publishing. Not only that, but they also manage to find their way into positions of authority. I can remember at the hearing trying to explain my position in the simplest of terms. A man works hard in a factory, then takes an extra job in the evening so that he can save enough money to use as a down payment on a co-op house. He can give his family a better life. The house was his incentive. That incentive must be attainable. It must be there for him to strive for. A working woman may make an extra effort because she wants a pretty new dress, new shoes, or she may be saving rubles for a new car or apartment for the family. She is creating the market, not some bureaucrat with a computer. He may sit there and the computer can tell him that we need so many reactors or dresses or automobiles, but his calculus and mathematical models may just be useless numbers that will produce a warehouse full of unsellable products unless he factors in human behavior patterns. No economist can produce projection figures for any segment of the economy unless he pays attention to the forces that the marketplace creates. There can be no exploitation if you are creating what the people want. They will gladly work harder and produce more. We are talking about the marketplace, not the people's resources like energy and water. Nadine says that even though you and I have different forms of articulation and means of expression, we are both striving for the same thing, social justice. That was the whole purpose of my book. If a person works on a state collective and the state provides that person with a home and medical care and education for his children and crib to grave looking after, he needs to be provided with some form of inspiration to motivate maximum effort. That is true. If he is feeling unrewarded for his efforts, he may decide that he will do as little as he can and spend the rest of his time in a bottle of vodka. It would not be fair to hitch him to the same harness as a diligent worker. Collectives and its leadership have been dealing with this problem for a long time. There are some people who are more difficult to motivate in every society. The Soviet people know this very well, and it is the team spirit that we strive for. Having said that, my book asks to free the better worker from the harness, give him an extra incentive, and let him produce for the state and for himself. Nadine is prodding me again, indicating that I am lecturing. To end the incredible story, I was suspended from the party for 1 year. I had many supporters, but I had to wait for the party debate to end before I could even speak. I did not want to lose my post at the university. In 1975, the book was rediscovered and published. It was said to be more relevant at that time. I no longer cared about the book. Another point that I did make in the book that party officials agreed on was that economics and how our system works, as opposed to other systems, should be a required course in secondary schools. That idea was adopted during the Khrushchev years, and I feel that I made a small contribution to the income growth of our citizens. Knowing how the system works is an inspiration in itself. I feel because we teach them that the entire community rests in their hands and that they are the owners of all their resources. I spoke at an all-union Central Council of Trade Unions this year, and my subject was the need for a better understanding of our problems in the area of world trade. A true peace can never be achieved until the people of all nations understand international trade. Most wars are started and ended for economic reasons. Despots are brought to power by failing economic structures. When I see a country moving to a political extreme, I also see an economy cracking under the feet of the people. My ideas presented at the Council of Trade Unions was very well received. Copies were sent to the United Nations representatives. I mentioned the war slideshow that I still have in my head from time to time. Well, I also have a Sasha show. I try from time to time to step outside of myself and look at Sasha Nikolaevich from a distance. It helps me put the advances of my country into a much better perspective. For example, I have been in and out of favor with the party for 20 years. Today I say that with pride. 20 years ago, I said it with fear. I often point out that in America, Democrats and Republicans sometimes cross party lines and may be out of favor with their party leaders for a while. That kind of independence is something to be proud of, David. Nadine is poking my shoulder. She wants me to ask you if you would like to exchange some recipes. I like to make new dishes, but tonight I am making a very old one. Galvasu, pomodoro, capuzza soup with lentils and tomato. I cannot give you a recipe because I never measure anything. When it tastes good, then it must be the right recipe. I brown the sausage, skim off the fat, boil lentils until they are tender, add cabbage shredded, and tomatoes and mustard, brown sugar, and pieces of pork. I serve the soup first with black bread and heavy cheese, and then I serve the meat with the cabbage and lentils. It may not look great on paper, but I was raised on it. So was my father, and most likely his father before him. You see, David, what Nadine can do when she puts on those glasses and begins to read over my shoulder. With her glasses on, that woman could rule the world. One minute I am talking about international economics, and the next she has me talking about Calvasu. When you get here, I shall be glad to cook for you and Marge, but Nadine must serve it and do the dishes. Please, David, tell me that you do not cook and do the dishes. Not far from our apartment is a very nice park. It is just down the Sadovoya, about 1 kilometer. They have a small zoo, and in the summer Nadine and I like to walk with the tourists. It is a lovely walk. In the center of the zoo lives a family of orangutans. They are a favorite with all of the children. But there is one female there with long, flowing red hair. She is obviously the boss. I named her the Tsarina Nadina. Now, David, I do not want you to think that my lovely wife bosses me around. We have a wonderful relationship and a very good partnership. But as I said, she is strong-willed. I used to smoke cigarettes. After the war, everybody did. After I got married, my new wife would make me go outside to smoke. Everyone in the building thought that was very funny. I stopped smoking more than 20 years ago, and I cannot stand the smell of smoke now. I should have asked you if you or Marge smoked before telling you this story, but it is best that you know beforehand that Nadine will not permit smoking in our apartment. I shall never forget when a high-ranking official came to our apartment for dinner, and after he finished eating, he lit his pipe. Nadine scowled and said, "Sasha, why don't you two go out for a walk?" "But it's raining outside," the official said. "That's all right," Nadine answered with a smile. "The rain won't kill you, but the pipe will." The man got up and went into the bathroom to knock the ashes out of his pipe. Now Nadine has a sign outside the front door that reads, "No smoking." I am reminded that the pipe smoker was here because at that time I was once again in trouble with the party. He came to ask me to tone down my opposition to the madness of rapidly building nuclear power plants. I told both my colleagues and my students that rushing into nuclear power was a knee-jerk reaction to the folly of the West. The scientific community here is all-powerful. They watch the United States very closely, and if America is doing it, then they must do it bigger and better and first. I would never be accused of impeding scientific research and development. I never said that the plants should not be built, but I said that neither the economic factors nor the environmental danger had warranted the risk at that time. I wanted more research done to perfect the use of the reactor and the best use of the scarce and very expensive uranium. Why should we hurry when we led the world in oil and coal production? One must understand the times. In the era of the late 60s and early 70s, we made many mistakes due to our overreacting to the West. Militarists, politicians, and yes, scientists stampeded over intellectual debate on the subject of nuclear power plants. You were motivated to build yours because of the fear of losing world control over fossil fuel and, of course, the illusion of never-ending profits. We built ours mostly because of politics. Our scientists were in a lather to get our plants online, not because we needed the power so desperately, but because of the need to show the world that we could do it. We produced tons of internationally distributed propaganda, material telling our own people and the rest of the world how efficient and safe our plants were. In the light of what happened, I feel very guilty about criticizing the effort now. We have plants online, and we are using them. They are producing energy, and the energy is being put to good use, but I still wish that they were not there. As you can imagine, David, Chernobyl is not the most popular after-dinner subject here. I did not believe the propaganda in the 70s, and I do not believe a word of it now. America is finding the plants an economic drain, like the weight of the mountain climber's pack. The closer the climber gets to the top, the heavier the pack gets on his tired legs. Nuclear power is getting very heavy. I am sure that your consumers are not paying less for their energy today than they were before the plants were built. It was, and I might add, still is, a beautiful dream. If the plants that produce their own fuel could be safely built, the entire world would soon have an abundance of energy that was almost cost-free above the production cost. That would quickly raise the standard of living for everyone. But if one mistake is made, as Chernobyl has already shown us, we can wipe out huge numbers of people and render large areas of productive land useless. Why then should we be in such a hurry when we still have so many other sources of energy available to us? Although it is hard to believe, many plants built back in the 70s are obsolete today, and the cost of shutting them down will exceed the original building costs. The question of storage for hot materials still has not been resolved in your country or mine. Economically, the numbers are still very bad, and I have opposed nuclear power on these grounds. We now face the same problems that you do, although on a much larger scale. You still live with the near disaster of 3 Mile Island over your head, and we have the real disaster of Chernobyl. I become very emotional when I think of what has happened to the place that I still call Gregoria's land. As you must know, David, Plotnica was not far from Chernobyl. The beautiful marsh, the rivers, and canals are now places that people fear. The ancient ritual of gathering mushrooms for soup and to dry for the winter is no more. No one wants to eat mushrooms from Byelorussia anymore. Mothers worry about the milk that their children drink. Was it worth it? Of course it was not. I belong to academicians who would like to see a nuclear-free world, and that includes nuclear power, nuclear submarines that could destroy an entire ocean, and of course, all nuclear weapons. Nadine is also a member, and last year we marched with a group that was made up of members from all nations, including the United States, to tell the leaders of the entire world that we want a halt to nuclear weapons and the building of nuclear plants. We encourage more nuclear research, as someday nuclear power may be an important factor in the creation of an economically sound world order. It was a very exciting experience for me. I had never been involved in such a thing before, and neither had Nadine. We were both very nervous at first, not knowing how our friends would react. Our daughters, Ludmilla and Sarah, along with their children, joined the march. We were greeted with flowers and the traditional icons. I kissed old friends along the way and even encouraged some of my students to come along. At dinner, the night after the march, Nadine was still so excited about what had happened that she felt compelled to tell her daughters and grandchildren what she always found so difficult to talk about in the past. She wanted to tell them how much the Soviet Union and the whole world has changed since she was a girl. That beautiful grandmother wanted to give the children a personal, in-depth, and dimensional history that they just took part in. She told them When she was their age, her parents left their family home in Stalingrad, which is now Volgograd, in the face of the advancing Nazi army, so their precious child would be safe. Her father, who was an invalid, made his way on crutches for many miles, all the way to Varennes, before they were picked up and taken to the outskirts of Moscow. There, both of her parents worked packing munitions until they were caught outside one day in a bombing raid, and both were killed. Nadine told them of the Stalin years after the war, and what would have happened to them if they had gone on the march back then. David, in 2 days, Nadine and I will go on our annual pilgrimage to Volgograd. We go every year to take part in the ceremony that marks the day when Field Marshal Paulus surrendered the Soviet army. I know that you have read about the great battle of Stalingrad, but we both wish that you could come with us to the Memyev Kuran at the top of the hill where the major part of the battle was fought, or to the Pavlov house, named after Sergeant Jacob Pavlov, who held off the Nazis for 58 days with just a handful of men. There you can touch the Soviet soul. When I was a 12-year-old boy, and my pioneer leader would take us to historic places where the Russians defeated Napoleon, my friends would tell jokes about it and laugh and wonder when we were going to eat. We would not care to hear the stories, to hear about the defeat of the Tsar that was suffered at the hands. We would not care to hear about the defeat that the Tsar suffered at the hands of the Japanese. We were Soviets in the New World, and we didn't think much of our history before the revolution. We had a Soviet feeling. That is what my father taught me. Our pre-revolutionary provincialism gives our history divergent aspects that were very hard for me to relate to. The Soviet youth of today have no such problems. Pre-revolution history has been drawn together for them, and from there, they'll all feel like participants. I never knew anyone who fought in the Napoleonic Wars, but we all fought against fascism. Each year, the young pioneers in Volgograd act as hosts for the visitors and participate in the solemn ceremonies. Nadine's entire family was lost. All of her aunts and uncles, and even her friends, were almost gone. Almost all gone. We have been going to Volgograd on this day since we first got married, and I suppose that we will continue to do so as long as we are able. Nadine was only 9 years old when her father started the trek to Moscow, where she was to go to school, and later to the orphanage. She also lived in her grandfather's house when she was a child, and remembers how everything was then. Her father worked for a blacksmith, and she remembers the day that they brought him home with his leg crushed from the weight of a wagon that had toppled over on top of him. There is nothing left of the old city today, just a pockmarked old flour mill that was so gallantly defeated and has been left as a shrine. The entire city had to be rebuilt, and of course that meant the lives of the people had to be recreated. They had no homes, no possessions, no food, no clothing, no water, no medical care. Their primary concern at first was to try and put their families together, or what was left of it. They had to start from the dirt and build up. Nadine doesn't cry anymore when we go there. She volunteers some of her time at the hospital and exchanges ideas with her colleagues at a medical conference. I find it hard to blink back the tears when I see the older men and women wearing their medals and hugging each other as they remember the siege of Stalingrad. I must reach for my handkerchief when I see the women telling the young pioneers how they had to carry water to the soldiers and how they managed to get many of the children out. They tell the awful stories of eating sawdust bread to survive, and about the many who starved to death. For you, they tell the children. I have a framed picture that I took a few years ago of just such a woman. She was hugging a young pioneer girl in her uniform, and the woman kept saying over and over, "Gravsky, Gravsky, beautiful, beautiful." The first year that we went there, Nadine found a man who worked at the same blacksmith shop with her father. She also located 2 distant relatives. They all adopted her, and she has become part of their growing family. So again I have wandered. I went from economics to Kalbasu to nuclear power and to Volgograd. David, I must tell you that some of my least favorite people are those who read over my shoulder when I am typing. Nadine knows this, so she screws up her face like a little child and tries to read the copy upside down. She is laughing and says I must erase that. I will not erase it, because it is true. Her comments now is that I talk about crying too much. Tears of joy I do not consider crying. I must admit that when idiots at the publishing house condemned not only my work, that I could have lived with, but to condemn me as a person, and even hint that I might leave my beloved country, was more than I could tolerate. You know, David, Nadine and I were both talking about the incident with the book when we got your letter about those same years in America. We decided that the fear and divisiveness that you had there, we had here. And it was not caused by people like Stalin or McCarthy, but were a direct result of the sickness that was passed down without a cure from the days of Tsar and other ruthless European rulers. Immigrants brought the fear of oppressive colonialism along with their skills to America. That inbred fear of authority is what made them report on their own neighbors. It was a style, an ancient way of currying favor from the powerful, a style that I cannot truthfully say is dying out. I do not mean to imply that modern character is stronger than it was in the past. Greed still plays a role, and the preventative vaccine for that has not been found. But the old fears of political persecution have greatly diminished, at least in our country. We must keep it that way. In my case, a whispering campaign was begun by one of those super patriots who wants to be the king. Who wants to be the king bureaucrat of all the bureaucrats. He first circulated a story that I was going to take a teaching job in the United States, and that I wrote such pro-capitalist theories in order to ensure my job in America. I tell you, David, I felt that old surge, and if I had known who it was at the time, I am sure that I would have physically attacked him. If my theories were capitalistic, imagine what the fool would be saying about Gorbachev today. There are those in the Soviet Union who express dismay over the fact that the world perceives perestroika as one giant step towards capitalism, and a step that was influenced by the West. People who express those fears have very little knowledge of the many ingredients that went into the pot before perestroika emerged. The culmination of years in economics and political planning, the successes and failures, the decades of reacting to the West when we should not have, all were subjects fully debated. We developed industry in states like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. A new type of people emerged from a developed country that has for the first time been able to control its own destiny. They are educated, productive, confident, and looking always to the future. I see perestroika as a rose on the vine. We are asking the world to come and smell the rose. Mikhail Gorbachev, in a major speech, asked whether capitalism can adapt itself to the conditions of a nuclear weapons-free world, to the conditions of a new and equitable economic order, to the conditions in which the intellectual and moral values of the two world systems will be compared honestly. Nikita was asking the same question. Then he went on to say, the course of history in the next decades will depend on the way these questions are answered. You must agree, David, that deciding which rose has the most fragrant odor sure beats war. I don't suppose that I will ever get over the days when I was accused of being a possible defector. Everyone here at the university knew that I had been offered a post abroad and that I had turned it down. I worried about being homesick if I was away from my family in Moscow for even one semester. Besides, Nadine could not get away for any length of time, and I would never go without her. Now that we are both talking about retirement, we plan to do some traveling abroad. But we have a good life here, and there is so much to do yet that we would never think of leaving our country for good. Last Saturday, we were having some of those special family dinners that I love. Luba was here, and she and Nadine were discussing politics with Sarah and her husband. As I told you, they are both teachers, and they complain often about what is going on in the schools. Germain, Sarah's husband, was complaining about the materialism and superficiality of his students and their imitating of Western escapist music. He said that he was afraid, as many conservatives are, that Glasnost and the new perestroika may get out of hand if it is not structured properly. Oh, said Luba, we must think more of our young people than that. Yes, they try to escape. So do I sometimes. They are the same as young people all over the world. They worry about nuclear war. They worry about another Chernobyl. They worry about the air becoming so polluted they'll no longer be able to breathe. They worry about the lakes and oceans and the drinking water becoming unusable. Those are great weights for young people to deal with. They are things I worry about too, and so should you. Politics take a back seat to these issues because our young people do not feel that they have any political influence. That is where what perestroika was supposed to be for. It means that at long last we are letting our Constitution speak freely for all of us. That is the promise that Lenin made to our people and the promise that we made to them after the war. Hitler delayed it. Stalin feared it. But here we are, and the children are the beneficiaries. I do not think that they will throw it away. As usual, I agree with Luba. I must say that I am a bit apprehensive, and I think that most Soviet people are. We adults always ask ourselves, have our sacrifices and our teaching been enough for the young people and the next generation to know how to enjoy the fruit without cutting down the tree? Can they suppress the greed and view the bounty of today's socialism through the eyes of a new progressive socialist? An economist. I have a very positive feeling about the direction that Gorbachev is taking us. I feel that we are once again heading for the Elbe River to meet the West with open and loving arms. There weren't any politics, racist remarks, or social barriers, or any of the other divisive elements in our hearts or thoughts that day. We had defeated a common enemy, and together we rejoiced. We met on one level, the human level. And all of us, those who were present and those who were not, gave our hearts to the scene of American and Soviet troops hugging each other and exchanging gifts. We felt that together we had saved the human spirit for another generation. Today we also have common enemies. They are even more odious than fascism. Luba is right. Young people have a heavy sword over their heads. If Chernobyl taught us anything, it is that the world is a very small place today. Chernobyl frightened the entire world. We know that. I feel that the next generation is begging us to meet again and defeat the common enemies, and the sooner the better. The brave American sailors who faced the Nazi air attacks and the submarines to get through the North Sea and bring supplies to the port of Murmansk were not bringing supplies to communists. They were bringing them to the people. The expression vox populi, vox Dei is very appropriate for our time. Most of us here believe not in a supreme being, but that people are God. The voice of the people is the voice of God. That articulates what the world wants today. Not anyone's old dogma, but a clear new voice of peace, with the hope that we will hear that voice of the people every day from now on. I will close. With love, your cousin in the Soviet Union, Sasha. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.